Namaskar. Welcome to my talk, The Neither Slack Nor Tense, the Yoga of Spiritual Energy. In Pali, the English word energy is often used to translate viriya, defined by Tamil Cube as vigor, energy, effort, strength. This word appears frequently all through the Pali Canon, along with such close synonyms as power, strength, effectiveness, or upaya, fire, teja, zest, ardor, etc. According to the Pali English Dictionary, it is derived from vira, cognate with Latin vir, virtus, virtue, from Vedic Sanskrit, meaning man, hero, chief, as well as people, humanity, much like the English word man. Similarly, the Pali vira means manly, mighty, heroic, a hero, even divine. The Majjhima commentary states that the higher states of arhatship are produced by manly strength. Viriya refers to the state of a strong man, that is, vigor, energy, effort, exertion. In Sanskrit, it is virya, seminal energy, strength, power, also translated as courageous engagement by Peter Harvey in his introduction to Buddhism. The Da De Jing has a similar concept, de, the complement of Tao, often translated into English as virtue or power, which comes from the same Indo-European root as vira and implies the same connotation of manliness that underlies the classical conception of virtue. Sometimes it is also translated as character. The Indian view of masculinity. Already it is clear from the foregoing that there is a special and specific association between the concept of virtue and masculine energy, often called bindu in Indian literature. The Sanskrit word bindu also occurs in the Pali, where it means a drop, spot, or cipher. Compare bija and oja. Masculine energy played a significant role in early Buddhism in that it became the focus of monasticism, enshrined in the first training rule of the Vinaya, mandating chastity. In his study of images of masculine energy and the body in Indian Buddhism, A Bull of a Man, 2009, author John Powers discusses the traditional Indian view of masculine energy. Powers makes it clear that in Indian tradition, including Buddhism, physical and spiritual energy are cognate concepts. Thus, the Buddha is simultaneously a supreme spiritual master and a virile kshatriya warrior, handsome, with large quantities of saliva and strong desire. Therefore, mandating chastity is not a prohibition of vital energy as such, but rather of its profanation. Many of the Buddhist monastics are represented as extremely virile and attractive young men. The Pali Canon mentions young men frequently, implying that young men were particularly attracted to the Buddha Dharma. The Buddha himself is represented as so handsome and charismatic that women actually fainted in his presence. Sariputta was initially attracted to the Buddha Sangha by the surpassing beauty, quote unquote, of Upasina, a Buddhist monk. Sariputta subsequently became the monastic partner of Maudgalyayana, who were inseparable for the rest of their lives, dying 2 weeks apart. Sariputta became renowned as the monk foremost in wisdom, and Maudgalyayana as the monk foremost in psychic powers. Powers writes, quote, in ancient India, vital essence was associated with the energy of life, and men who recklessly depleted their vitality were said to become physically diminished. Excessive self indulgence leads to various morbidities and premature death. By contrast, the heroic ascetic who retains his vital essence is the most manly and virile of men and enjoys robust health, tremendous physical energy, and mental alertness. And he also develops supernatural powers or siddhi. Those who practice celibacy and other acts of austerity accumulate an energy called tapas, which literally means heat. Sages who remain chaste for long periods and who combine this with advanced levels of meditation can even challenge the gods in terms of power and wisdom. Quote unquote. Nenamoli and Bodhi's translation of the Majjhima Nikaya makes this association with virility clear. Quote, for a faithful disciple who is intent in fathoming the teacher's dispensation, it is proper that he conduct himself thus, quote, willingly let only my skin, sinews, and bones remain, and let the flesh and blood dry up on my body. But my energy shall not be realized as long as I have not attained what can be attained by manly strength, manly energy, and manly persistence. Quote unquote. These are the same words used in the vow that the Bodhisattva took at the foot of the Bodhi tree prior to his enlightenment. As with the prohibition of eating after noon, which was originally an Ayurvedic practice to optimize health, based on the waxing of the Agni, the digestive fire, Buddhist chastity has complex cultural resonances. In traditional Indian belief, as in the Hellenic view, the female principle is identified with the somatic, physical polarity of existence, whereas the male is identified with the psychic, spiritual polarity in a vertical hierarchy of value. Powers writes, quote, Buddhists, like other religious groups of the time, viewed the male body as naturally more conducive to self control than the female body was. Females are depicted as prone to emotional instability, while men are physically stronger, more controlled, and less subject to the vagaries of emotion. Quote unquote. Thus, male celibacy is anti Semitic. The Vinaya amply refutes the notion that monastics were actually sexless. Monastics must be celibate, but they must also be unimpaired. We find this doctrine, as well as its associated problems and difficulties, in Catholicism and Mormonism too. Thus, quote, the sage becomes more potent and more desirable as a result of avoiding sex, quote unquote. In order to understand the Buddhist view, we must avoid projecting Judeo Christian notions of shame and guilt onto Buddhism, the frankness of the original writings of which have offended more than one translator. By his own admission, the Buddha was promiscuous while a bodhisattva in his final rebirth, right up until his 29th year, merely 6 years before his enlightenment. Powers explicitly recognizes this as a legitimate goal of spiritual practice. In the myth of Chandra, the god of the moon, which is also a symbol of the teaching in Buddhism and of Soma rather in Hinduism, is associated with the lunar observance. Soma, the ritual beverage of the Vedic sacrifice and the drink of the gods, is also associated with vital essence. The consumption of soma rather, confers timelessness and is said to be able to restore vitality lost due to excessive self-indulgence. Its silver-white color identifies it as a lunar substance. The vital essence was also regarded as medicinal. Says Powers, quote, Indian medical lore holds that the vital essence is produced by a process of refinement of the elements comprising food, and that the vital essence pervades the tissues of the entire body. It is also a formative principle in all bodies in the universe. Vital essence is the source of physical vitality in some sources. Blood is the female equivalent. Buddhaghosa differentiates among distinct types of essence and rates their relative quality, quote unquote. Powers writes that, quote, men who practice self control can retain their vital essence and thus acquire power, quote unquote. These ideas are developed in the last great Buddhist Tantra, the Kalachakra, about 966 of the Common Era, but are clearly archaic in origin. the concept of energy in the Pali Canon. Energy, in its three phases of arousal, endeavor, and exertion, is referred to frequently all through the Pali Canon in stock lists, including the four bases of power, the five faculties or powers, the seven factors of enlightenment, the eight causes and conditions of wisdom, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the 10 perfections. The Buddha says that he does not know of anything that so causes unarisen wholesome qualities to arise and arisen unwholesome qualities to decline as energy. The Buddha says that the enlightenment factor of energy is both physical and mental. It is nourished by frequent and careful attention to the elements of arousal, endeavor, and exertion. Bodhi comments that these three elements refer to the initial and intermediate phases of the development of energy, culminating in, quote, full intensity. The connotation is obvious. The Buddha says that energy is aroused, developed, and fulfilled by faith, and discriminating the teaching with wisdom, leading to mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, faith, and rapture. Alternatively, he warns that arousing energy, quote, in a badly expounded Dhamma and discipline dwells in suffering, quote unquote. Energy is aroused, quote, for the attainment of the as yet unattained, for the achievement of the as yet unachieved, for the realization of the as yet unrealized, quote unquote. Energy appears in the Sutta Vibhanga as the first cause leading to ecstasy in the practice referred to throughout the Vinaya by the stock phrase, quote, putting forth or arousing energy, unquote. In the Anguttara Nikaya, we encounter the power of energy, quote unquote, as a synonym for the arousal of energy. Quote, one generates desire to abandon those qualities that are unwholesome and reckoned as unwholesome, those that are blamable and reckoned as blamable, those that are dark and reckoned as dark, those that should not be cultivated and are reckoned as not to be cultivated, those that are unworthy of the noble ones and reckoned as unworthy of the noble ones. One makes an effort, arouses energy, applies one's mind, and strives for this. One generates desire to obtain all those qualities that are wholesome and reckoned as wholesome, those that are blameless and reckoned as blameless, those that are bright and reckoned as bright, those that should be cultivated and are reckoned as to be cultivated, those that are worthy of the noble ones and reckoned as worthy of the noble ones. One who makes an effort, arouses energy, applies one's mind, and strives for this. This is called the power of energy, quote unquote. Elsewhere, putting forth energy appears as the culmination of a Dharma talk. In the Mahavagga, we have something approximating to an instruction in putting forth energy in the form of the story of Sona Kolevisa, who received ordination and stayed in the cool grove. Through this story, we also begin to understand the intensity of the energy that is aroused by the Buddha and his followers. While he was pacing up and down, that is, practicing walking meditation, Sona's body put out so much energy that his feet broke, quote unquote. As a result, the pathway became covered with blood. Presumably, this means that he cut his feet from so much walking barefoot. Sona began to consider returning to the life of a householder. The Buddha saw the blood and asked the monastics about it. Rather than condoning such extreme effort, the Buddha went to Sona, and through the famous metaphor of the lute, he taught Sona how to regulate his psychosomatic energy. Quote, what do you think about this, Sona? Were you clever at the lute's stringed music, as when formerly you were a householder? When the strings of your lute were too taut, was your lute at that time tuneful and fit for playing? When the strings of your lute were too slack, Was your lute at that time tuneful and fit for playing? When the strings of your lute were neither too taut nor too slack, but were keyed to an even pitch, was your lute at that time tuneful and fit for playing? Even so, Sona, does too much output of energy conduce to restlessness? Does too feeble energy conduce to slothfulness? Therefore, do you, Sona, determine upon evenness in energy, and pierce the evenness of the faculties, and reflect upon it. Quote unquote. Energy that is too slack or too lax leads to lassitude or laziness, whereas energy that is too tense or forceful leads to restlessness. Thus, the Buddha teaches the middle way between extremes, energetic balance and evenness of the spiritual faculties as a basis for concentration. Because of the practice of evenness in energy, Sona pierced the awareness of the faculties, realized the supreme goal of the path by direct knowledge, and achieved emancipation. Teja means heat, radiance, glory, power, and is thus a near synonym of viriya. In the Majjhima Nikaya, heat and vitality are equated, standing in the same relationship to each other as radiance to flame. The condition of heat, quote unquote, that is tejudhatu, is referred to all through the Vinaya as an advanced spiritual attainment. This attainment is attributed to two monastics, Dabba the Himalayan and Sagata, who was the Buddha's personal attendant, thus dating the story to the first 20 years of the Buddha's career before Ananda became his personal attendant, and, quote, chief of those good at the heat condition, unquote. The story of Sagata is of particular interest because it has him using his heat condition to repel the heat of a hostile Naga. It is repeated in somewhat expanded form of the Buddha himself, where he is called Angirasa, the resplendent one. One suspects that the association of the teja with a serpent is not arbitrary, since the Indian tradition describes a serpent power, kundalini or coiled one, that is more than analogous to the concept of psychic heat, which also figures prominently in the Tibetan tradition. Kundalini awakening is a physical syndrome that has been described by Dr. Lee Sanella in his book, The Kundalini Experience. If one looks closely at the oldest Indian representation of a cross legged yogi, the so called Pashupati seal of the Indus Valley civilization, about 2350 to 2000 before the Common Era, the figure clearly exhibits signs of tumescence. Here we begin to see clearly that the Buddhist concept of energy has some unusual characteristics, and that any identification with vigor or similar such abstractions is simplistic at best. The Jungian notion of psychic energy may be close to the Buddhist conception. In the story of the Naga serpent, the equation of heat and psychic power is explicit. Quote, truly, the great recluse is of great psychic power, of great majesty, in that he can master by heat the heat of the fierce serpent king, who has psychic power and is a terribly venomous snake. Unquote. The description suggests the visionary phenomena of psychedelic experience. Quote, then at the end of that night, the serpent's flames became extinguished, but the multicolored flames of him of psychic power remained. And with multicolored flames, dark green, then red, crimson, yellow, and crystal colored, were on Angirasa's body. Quote unquote. The supreme example of the power of energy appears in the book of the great decease, the Mahaparinibbana. The Buddha, knowing that his time was near, took Ananda to Chapala shrine and gave him a teaching called the Four Roads to Power, or iddhipāda. This practice is associated with the Brahma Sanat Kumara, Pali Sanan Kumar. The four roads to power involve the concentration of intention, energy, consciousness, and investigation by an effort of will. The Buddha tells Ananda that by this practice, the Buddha might live out his age, quote unquote, the meaning of which is ambiguous, but may refer to the human lifespan of 100 years or an historical epoch of millions of years. But Ananda, always a bit slow despite his phenomenal memory, did not beg the Buddha to live on before the Buddha declares his intention to die in 3 months. Too late, Ananda asks the Buddha to live on after he renounces the force of life, quote unquote. But a Buddha's word is absolute and cannot be reversed. Conscious dying is, of course, a feature of Tibetan Lamaism and is widely attested. The Majjhima Nikaya identifies 5 shackles in the heart: sensual pleasures, body, form, eating and sleeping, and theism. When these are overcome, the monastic develops the basis for spiritual power, consisting of concentration due to zeal, energy, purity of mind, investigation, and enthusiasm. The Buddha says that the energy enlightenment factor, quote unquote, is aroused in one who develops the investigation of states, quote unquote, enlightenment factor, which arises as a result of mindfulness of the body, feelings, mind, and mind objects, the four foundations of mindfulness. From this aroused energy, unworldly rapture, quote unquote, arises. Rapture develops into tranquility. Tranquility develops concentration. Concentration develops equanimity. Right effort, the 6th stage of the Noble Eightfold Path, is divided into the 4 right exertions: restraint, abandonment, cultivation, preservation, in which the faculty of energy is seen, associated with strength, firmness, and not shirking. According to the Devata Samyutta, energy clears the noble path by dispelling drowsiness, lethargy, laziness, discontent, and torpor. Bodhi comments that, quote, the clearing of the path comes about when one expels the mental corruptions by means of the path itself, with the energy or viriya connascent with the path, quote unquote. The Sagatavagga says that energy overcomes suffering and associates it with initiative, toil, struggle, and striving, quote, for the attainment of the as yet unattained, for the achievement of the as yet unachieved, for the realization of the as yet unrealized, quote unquote. The Nidana alludes to the possibility of using spiritual power or energy to teleport from one distant location to another. In the Mahavagga, the Buddha reveals a practice that he developed as a bodhisattva prior to his enlightenment, which he calls the 4 bases of spiritual power. Quote, it occurred to me, here a bhikkhu develops the basis for spiritual power that possesses concentration due to desire, energy, mind, and investigation, and volitional formations of striving, thinking, thus my desire, energy, mind, and investigation will be neither too slack nor too tense, recalling the metaphor of the lute that we have discussed, and it will be neither constricted internally nor distracted externally. And he dwells perceiving after and before, so after, as after, so before, as below, so above, as above, so below, as by day, so at night, as at night, so by day. Thus, with a mind that is open and unenveloped, he develops the mind imbued with luminosity. Quote unquote. Internal constriction refers to sloth and torpor, whereas external distraction refers to disturbance because of the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, quote unquote. That is, pleasure in the objects of the 5 physical senses. Bodhi suggests that the phrase, as a before, so after, as after, so before, means maintaining consistency in the practice of meditation, quote unquote. According to the text, as below, so above, as above, so below, refers to the analysis of the body as consisting of numerous taints. Quote, there are in this body head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, contents of the stomach, excrement, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, snot, fluid of the joints, urine, quote unquote. As by day, so at night, as at night, so by day, means that the practice is practiced all the time. According to the commentary, quote, developing the mind imbued with luminosity, unquote, means that one perceives an internal mental or psychic illumination with the same intensity and vividness that one perceives the light of the sun. Thus, enlightenment is not a metaphor, but a psychosomatic experience, attained attained what can sorry, just give me 1 second. Energy is achieved by cultivating indefatigability on striving. Quote, willingly let only my skin, sinews, and bones remain, and let the flesh and blood dry up in my body. But I will not relax my energy so long as I have not attained what can be attained by manly strength, energy, and exertion. Unquote. The Buddha repeats this instruction for desire, energy, mind, and investigation. This is, of course, an elaboration of the four roads to power that we encountered in the Majjhima Nikaya. This exercise leads directly to the development of the various kinds of spiritual power, quote unquote, referring to siddhis, including self multiplication, invisibility, the ability to pass through matter, weightlessness, levitation, the ability to explore other worlds, both astronomical and transcendent, clairaudience, telepathy, memory of past lives, and a direct clairvoyant perception of karmic causality. This stock list of spiritual powers is a recurrence of a proto-tantric thread that runs all through the Pali Canon and became highly developed in Vajrayana Buddhism, especially in Tibet, and is also experienced, as I have discussed before, in the context of the UFO phenomenon and psychedelic states of consciousness. The references to as before, so after, as after, so before, etc., and to a quote, a mind that is open and unenveloped, quote unquote, suggests the practice of the expansion of consciousness that one finds in the famous metta meditation. Finally, the Buddha says that the ultimate fruit of the practice of the four roads to power is the destruction of the taints, resulting in the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, realized by and for oneself with direct knowledge or gnosis. Once again, the Pali Canon makes it clear that wisdom is, is the essential salvific principle, as we have discussed elsewhere. Concentration is explained as one pointedness of mind, quote unquote. Desire is desire for the renunciation of evil and wholesome states, and the development and maintenance of positive wholesome states using the four faculties of desire, energy, mind, and investigation. These terms suggest the four yogas of the Indian system: bhakti, the yoga of love, devotion, or worship, or desire; hatha, the yoga of arduous physical effort; and jhana, the cognitive yoga of mental or philosophical inquiry, whereas the reiterated references to, quote, volitional formations of striving, unquote, subsumes karma yoga. Compare Vivekananda's four yogas. Ananda tells the Brahmin Unaba that the four bases of spiritual power is the practice by which desire is abandoned, which he identifies with the goal of the Buddhist path. Interestingly, therefore, it is by desire, that is, striving, that desire is abandoned. Imaba objects to the practice on exactly this point, an argument that Ananda refutes, pointing out that when desire is gratified, it abates. Similarly, when the desire for arhatship is satisfied, desire abates. This is reminiscent of the Buddha's distinction between wholesome and unwholesome pleasures, only the second of which he rejects. Thus, in turn, became the basis for his rejection of physical asceticism as a way. The Buddha also says that the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path leads to the development of the basis for spiritual power. While on retreat, it occurred to Ananda that the practice of asceticism is successful for one who relies half on good friends and half on manly effort, quote unquote. When he returns, he asks the Buddha about this, who declares that, quote, this is the entire holy life, Ananda, that is, good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. When a bhikkhu has a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, quote unquote. Spiritual friendship and energy are thus equated. Related doctrines. We have already discussed the correlation between the concept of energy in the Pali Canon and the lunar soma juice. Soma appears in the Pali Canon as amata, referring to the immortal or deathless state, but also to ambrosia, cognate with Sanskrit amrita, the divine water of timelessness, churned by the gods from the one world ocean. Energy is cognate with other concepts in the Pali Canon, including karma, the essential kinetic or energetic principle itself, will or intention, which creates karma, craving, which is the human kinetic principle in its fallen, debased, passionate, or attached state, and siddhi, spiritual, magical, or psychic powers that are said to result from intense spiritual practice. We also find the principle of energy implicit in other doctrines of the Pali Canon with which we are familiar. Merit, the stored accumulation of positive karmic potential, the transfer of merit, by which merit may be intentionally directed, shared, and increased, the power of truth, which figures prominently in the Jatakas but also appears elsewhere in the Pali Canon, and the act of truth, by which the potential power of truth may be utilized to create change, usually by means of a vow or affirmation. The kinetic principle also appears in the concept of mantra, by which the repetition of a verbal formula with awareness and intention can facilitate spiritual transformation, including siddhis. And in mantra yoga, the original term for tantra, the yoga of energy or power. These concepts correlate with similar concepts in other post Pali Buddhist and non Buddhist traditions, including the Indian concept of kundalini, the psychosomatic serpent energy, coiled or potential at the base of the spine, which the Buddha may have experienced during his practice of asceticism. Tibetan tummo or psychic heat, which can be generated to protect the body even in conditions of extreme cold. Chinese qi, the energy of vitality or life, which can be used to affect people at a distance as well as for healing in the practice of qigong. And finally, psychosomatic yoga, which is greatly developed in certain highly esoteric traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, especially Kala Chakra. Zoroastrianism refers to the kavarina or exarina, literally glory or splendor, referring to a divine mystical force or power associated with kingship and luck. The word is derived from Proto-Avestan havar, to shine, thus associating it with the devas, the shining ones. The word is also attested in Sogdian farn and Cotonese fara, which refers to the high position or dignity of a Buddha. Kavarina is also associated with the hyoma, a divine plant cognate with Vedic soma, possibly ephedra, a precursor of methamphetamine that excites the brain and increases body heat. It is still used in Chinese medicine and was also used as a tea by Native Americans and, interestingly, Mormon pioneers. These concepts, doctrines, and practices are not aberrations, but rather developments of concepts found in seminal form all through the Pali Canon and will constitute the subject of part 2 of this talk. Some synonyms and cognate terms for energy or viriya are ardent, atapi, arising, upada, arousal, aramba, delight, nandi, desire, chanda, enthusiasm, usolhi, exertion, opakama or sankara, fire, teja, intention, sankapa, life, ayu or jivita, light, aloka, luminosity, obasa or pabasa, manly effort, viriya, heat, usma, power, bata or iddhi, radiant, abasaro, rapture, piti, shining one, deva, stirring, aja, striving, padana, virtue, silava, vitality, ayu, and zeal or chanda. Part 2. Recapitulation of Part 1. Last time I introduced the topic of energy, Pali viriya, as an important element of the Buddhist path, and associated it with words relating to masculine energy. In the Indian tradition, male energy is explicitly associated with the spiritual quest, an association that is confirmed by depth psychology. As a man on the verge of self perfection, the Bodhisattva in his final rebirth is portrayed as a virile, healthy, attractive, and powerful male. The fact that the Buddha was not chaste during his early years created a difficulty for him in the context of the social norms of his time, resulting in accusations of laxness that dogged him all through his life. This is documented in the Pali Canon. Chastity was highly valued, and there is no indication that the Buddha was not completely chaste after the age of 29, although he was comfortable consorting with a royal harlot towards the end of his life. In this respect, he was rather like Jesus, the Galilean Bodhisattva, and quite unlike the self righteous religious moralists of his time and ours. The Buddhist description of energy or virility is clearly male. It is aroused, persisted in, and exerted. This may even be the ideological justification for the spiritual misogyny that we find all through the Pali Canon. However, the Buddha himself does not appear to have drawn this conclusion. Arousing energy alone is not sufficient, however. It must also be moderated, or it can become a source of instability. Arousing energy, quote unquote, is in fact the literal meaning of arya, noble, literally striving. Putting forth energy, quote unquote, is especially associated with mental concentration, as well as the so called walking meditation. There are also references to a condition of heat, quote unquote. Those expert in developing this condition, and therefore the implication of a yoga of heat, perhaps similar to that found in Tibetan Buddhism. This heat is associated with the snake, as in later Indian traditions associated with the kundalini energy at the base of the spine. The power of energy is also associated with the power of truth and the act of truth. Energy is aroused, quote, for the attainment of the as yet unattained, for the achievement of the as yet unachieved, for the realization of the as yet unrealized, quote unquote, and is even associated directly with the attainment of emancipation through the light and luminosity symbolism that is associated with the attainment of enlightenment, and an association that is not only in the English. Energy is also associated with the attainment of psychic powers, including a force of life that promotes longevity and the experience of ecstatic, visionary, and even psychedelic states of mind. I also identified cognate concepts that appear to be similar to energy that developed in Buddhist traditions, presumably based on the texts I have been citing. Once again, we see Buddhist traditions drawing on the same texts that we also find in the Pali Canon. These concepts include soma, karma, will, craving, siddhi, merit, power of truth, mantra, kundalini, tummo, and chi. I'll be discussing some of these traditions in this talk, especially kundalini yoga, tummo yoga, qigong, and psychosomatic yoga. Kundalini yoga. The concept of kundalini appears to have originated during the Upanishadic period, 9th to 3rd century before the Common Era. The word means coiled. It is also the name of the goddess, Durga, a form of Shakti, the primordial cosmic energy and divine feminine creative power. Kundalini was used as the name of a serpent like Shakti in the 11th century. The Yoga Kundalini Upanishad was codified in the 16th or 17th century. Kundalini refers to a psychophysical or psychosomatic spiritual energy or vital force associated with the area at the base of the spine, in the triangular shaped sacrum bone, the so called Muladhara chakra. Interestingly, the word sacrum means sacred. Kundalini is symbolized as a coiled serpent. The signs of Kundalini awakening include a variety of physical symptoms, including spasmodic jerking, sensations of electricity, heat, visions, unusual sounds, arousal, emotionality, headache, increased blood pressure, accelerated heartbeat, pain, sensitivity, altered states of consciousness, and disturbances of sleep or appetite. These symptoms may persist for various periods of time, but are usually self resolving if allowed to pursue their own course. Kundalini yoga is also known as Laya yoga, literally union by dissolution or absorption. It is a Hindu school of yoga influenced by Shaktism and Tantra. Its goal is to awaken, a word also used by the Buddha, Kundalini. Techniques used to achieve this include meditation, breath work or pranayama, chanting mantras, and physical postures or asanas or exercises. Practitioners say that Kundalini awakening feels like an electric current running through the spine. Kundalini yoga is a synthesis of hatha yoga, literally union by force or effort, kriya yoga, literally union by action, and laya yoga. Two classic textbooks of this yoga include the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and the Shiva Samhita. The Shiva Samhita refers to four yogas used to activate the Kundalini potential: mantra yoga, hatha yoga, laya yoga, and raja yoga, literally royal or kingly yoga, or union by will, and states that Kundalini realization is transdual. The Buddha refers to an illumination that he experienced because of his ascetic practices, which he associated with severe physical pain. Quote, but although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitting mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. Quote unquote. This experience was effected by means of intense mental concentration, extreme breath work, and self starvation. This sounds typical of Kundalini awakening. Gopi Krishna, for example, was in an extremely painful dysfunctional state for 16 years before his Kundalini finally became balanced and calm. When awakened or activated, the Kundalini is directed through the central nerve channel of the spine, the Sushumna, through 6 energy centers or chakras, whence it penetrates the seventh chakra, the Sahasrara, located at the top of the head, inducing an ecstatic state. Methods to awaken Kundalini are divided into active and passive. Active methods include physical exercises, concentration, visualization, breath work, meditation, and chanting. The passive method is surrendering oneself emotionally to the guru, the so called transference, whence the cult of guru worship or bhakti yoga that we find in popular Hinduism and in Buddhism too. Tummo yoga. Tummo refers to a form of Tibetan breathwork based on the 6 yogas of Naropa, 11th century, the 12th century Lamdre Tibetan path teachings, regarded as the highest or chief practice of the Shakya school, Kalachakra, 10th to 11th centuries, and Anuyoga, the second highest practice of the Nyingma system of Tibetan Buddhism, second only to Hatha Yoga or Dzogchen. The Tibetan word tummo means fierce woman or inner fire. The fundamental conception of tummo is familiar to us as the system of energy channels or nadis that run all through the body, especially the central spinal cord, and 2 adjacent channels that run on either side of the spine, associated with solar and lunar energies. In Dumo, the 3 lowest chakras are visualized to focus bodily awareness on the area below the navel. Vital energy, conceptualized as a wind, Sanskrit prana, is activated, accumulated, and forced into the central channel by a combination of breath control and other yogic exercises. As it accumulates, the energy creates a psychic heat, Tibetan drod, that destroys karma. Dumo is the practical basis of karma mudra, which I'll discuss shortly. Interestingly, Dumo practitioners wear clothes of special colors to intensify the Dumo fire. The mastery of Dumo is part of the completion stage of the Anuttara Yoga Tantra. The completion stage follows the generation state. Completion stage with marks is based partly on Dumo Yoga. Tummo, which is really the Tibetan version of Kundalini Yoga, also known as Chandali, Sanskrit Chandala, outcast possibly. Yoga was developed as a practice by the Tibetan Mahasiddhas, associated with Padmasambhava, between the 8th and 12th centuries. Milarepa was a prominent practitioner of Chandala Yoga. The ability of Tummo practitioners to withstand extreme cold is well attested. In Tibet, the Tummo adept is required to spend the night on a glacier, clad only in a cotton cloth. If he survives the night, he is considered to have mastered the Tummo practice. The Dutch daredevil William Hoff uses similar techniques to withstand extreme cold and has been studied by scientists. The following summary of Tummo Yoga is based on the classic translation of a Tibetan block print entitled in English translation, An Epitome of the Six Doctrines. The Yoga of the Psychic Heat consists of 5 preliminary exercises and 3 fundamental practices. The essential method is to sit cross legged, purify the body through a series of intensive visualizations and breathing exercises, and then, through the force of meditative concentration, activate and direct the psychic heat up through the spine to illuminate the brain and the whole body. The result is that one experiences an all pervading bodily warmth and bliss. The complete instruction consists of about 40 pages and presupposes very advanced eidetic and meditative skills. There are several Western witnesses to tummo yoga, including the adventurer Alexander David Neal, Lama Anagarika Govinda, and anthropologist Dr. John Crook. Qigong, literally the practice of vital energy. Qigong is used in Chinese martial arts like Kung Fu to cultivate and balance qi, or life energy. Similar in principle to walking meditation, Qigong coordinates bodily movements, breath work, and meditation. Qigong is traditionally a secret esoteric practice handed down by lineages of transmission and is especially associated with Taoism. The term is Taoist and originated during the Tang Dynasty, 7th to 10th centuries. There are many forms of Qigong, including 75 ancient and 56 modern forms. Today, Qigong combines Taoist internal alchemy, ancient meditations called cultivating Qi, and standing meditation, and a breathing exercise called guiding and pulling, quote unquote. Qigong plays a role in traditional Chinese medicine for its healing qualities. Confucianism to promote longevity and develop character, and as a form of meditation in Taoism and Buddhism. Since the Cultural Revolution in China, the Communist Party has worked to consolidate Qigong theory and practice on a scientific basis. The Qigong Science and Research Organization was established for this purpose in 1985, but the Chinese government has also cracked down on the practice since 1999. The Chinese Health Qigong Association, a state run agency established in 2000, officially recognizes 9 forms of Qigong. The concept of Qi is not too dissimilar from the Indian concept of prana, the vital wind that is associated with the vitality of the body, but also associated with a universal or cosmic energy. It is based on a theory of energy flow throughout the body, nerve meridians or channels, energy centers, and balancing qi in meridians or other pathways, much like Kundalini Yoga. Qigong incorporates 5 basic techniques: intentional movement, rhythmic breathing, awareness, visualization, and chanting or sound. In addition, Qigong practice incorporates a soft gaze and an expressionless face, a solid stance, relaxation, and balance and counterbalance, where one moves in relation to a center of gravity. The goals of Qigong practice include equanimity, tranquility, and stillness. Practicing with little or no motion is generally considered the highest form of Qigong practice. One can see the similarity to Buddhism here right away. Qigong may be classified as dynamic, static, meditative, and external. Dynamic or active Qigong, called Donggong, is based on repetitive stretching and fluid movements, breathing, and awareness. Static Qigong, called Jinggong, involves holding postures for extended periods, similar to yoga. An example of a Qigong posture is the horse stance, which I learned from my chiropractor, who was a Chinese Tai Chi master. External or meditative Qigong focuses on meditation, breath work, visualization, and chanting. External Qigong utilizes external supports, including herbs, food, drinks, massage, physical manipulations, and interaction with other living organisms, including treatment by a therapist who directs and transmits Qi. Qigong meditation combines slow, stylized movements, deep breathing, mental concentration, and visualization of Qi in the body. Psychosomatic yoga. In his Introduction to Buddhism, 2nd edition 2013, Peter Harvey refers quite openly to psychosomatic yoga. Tantric Buddhists reevaluate the body based on the early Buddhist insight that emancipation is realized through the body. The great Theravadian scholar translator Buddhaghosa went as far as to state that this realization is unique to the teaching. The Gya Samaja Tantra advances the yoga of pleasure as the path to Buddhahood. Enjoying desire without attachment requires a far more rigorous discipline than simple abstinence. This yoga is mostly practiced in the first Tibetan Buddhist school, the Nyingma, founded by Padmasambhava in the 8th century. Only partners with years of physical training can practice it. The vital essence, symbolizing the bodhicitta, is retained and visualized as ascending through an energy channel in the back to the top of the head, the Tibetan version of the Sushumna. Even among the conservative Gelugpa, founded by Tsongkhapa, this is still practiced by monastics as a visualization. The Nyingma have 9 grades, levels, or degrees of realization and practice. The top 3 degrees being Hatha Yoga, equivalent to Dzogchen, Anu Yoga, and the Mahayoga, working with the Yidams, symbols of enlightened energy, the mental body, and the 6 yogas of Naropa. According to Harvey, Anu Yoga is seen as particularly appropriate for the passionate. While visualizing the energy in the energy channels and chanting and visualizing mantras, the male is visualized as a divine being, and the female visualized as the Yidam's consort or Shakti. These embody skilled means and wisdom. In the esoteric twilight language of the Tantras, the male energy is called the Vajra, the diamond thunderbolt, representing indestructibility and irresistible force, and the female, the lotus flower. The energy is inhibited and sublimated, visualized as ascending the spine till it reaches the top of the head, where it generates a blissful state of non dual radiant clarity. Skilled means and wisdom are joined, all concepts and images vanish, and there is direct gnosis of emptiness. This yoga is performed in a calm state and with deliberation, so that the energy is directly experienced, reversed or inverted, the method of reversal, and finally transmuted into wisdom. Although the Pali Canon is clearly misogynistic, and the order was clearly intended to be chaste, it is reasonable to include psychosomatic energy in the category of the Buddhist conception of energy, and we have clearly established this in our discussion of the Buddhist concept of viriya, or virile energy, with reference to the oldest Buddhist texts in the first part of this talk. In his final rebirth as a bodhisattva, the Buddha was clearly active, to put it directly, up until his renunciation at the age of 29, 6 years prior to his enlightenment. Thus, the Pali Canon paints the picture of a virile male who transcends his own masculinity in the act of renunciation, rather than a eunuch, which is more commonly associated with monasticism in the West. The Pali Canon itself states that arhatship is only available to humans for the first 500 or so years after the parinibbana. Once again, the present century is perceived as a time of great significance. Psychosomatic yoga might also be associated with the path of the householder, who is clearly not celibate, but who may practice meditation according to the Pali Canon. Even according to the Pali Canon, it is possible for a householder to achieve arhatship. Thus, the mandating of chastity, according to the Vinaya, does not necessarily prohibit the possibility of a Buddhist psychosomatic yoga. Moreover, in fact, one finds this to be historically the case. There are even indications in the Vinaya that an unknown but significant number of monastics were not celibate, even during the time of the Buddha. In Tibet, psychosomatic yoga is called karma mudra, literally action seal. This is a Vajrayana or a Tantra practice of union with a consort, either physical or visualized. Karma mudra is considered equivalent in attainment to visualization of the Yidam and Tummo yoga. According to the 6 yogas of Naropa, it is either a yoga in its own right or an aspect of tummo yoga. The traditional Tibetan view is that karma mudra is necessary to achieve Buddhahood, although this is not universally held today, including by the present Dalai Lama. This explains the otherwise inexplicable significance of the Bodhisattva's enthusiasm for women during his youth, so unlike the sexless Messiah of the West. The mastery of Tummo Yoga is considered to be the prerequisite to practice Karma Mudra properly. Thus, it is a very advanced practice. Women communicated it through secret oral instructions. Women also wrote 7 8th century tantric texts. In Tibet, non monastic yogis, mainly in the Nyingma and Kagyu schools, would practice Karma Mudra, especially treasure or terma seekers, nyagpas, non monastic practitioners of Dzogchen, and hereditary lamas. The practice of Karma Mudra has also come to the West along with some Tibetan teachers, such as Kalu Rinpoche, with mixed results. See, for example, anthropologist June Campbell's book, Traveler in Space. There is also a book review online. Sexuality has featured prominently in the Tibetan tradition, including Krishna, Ramakrishna, and Aurobindo and the Mother, and others. Even the chaste Krishnamurti had an illicit affair, and Gandhi too, apparently. There are also autonomous Western traditions of psychosomatic yoga associated with the Gnostic Christians: Swedenborg, William Blake, John Dee and Edward Kelly, Pascal Beverly Randolph, Karl Kellner, Aleister Crowley, Adi Da, and others. Other ancient civilizations, including the Sumerians, Greeks, and Romans, conducted orgia in the context of spirituality amounting to a yoga. The essential metaphysical principle of psychosomatic yoga is the realization that nirvana and samsara are ultimately one in the transdual reality. The essential reality of the phenomenon is always enlightenment. This is the ultimate teaching of interconnectedness. Phenomena themselves do not cause suffering. It is craving that reifies sentient energy into illusory objects of attachment, kinetic and static. Therefore, all energy is essentially emptiness. The realization of emptiness is enlightenment. The phenomenal, therefore, can, through realization, be transmuted from a factor of ignorance into a factor of enlightenment by the skilled means, or upaya, of quenching desirous attachment. As Ananda states in the Pali Canon, desire disappears entirely when it is completely satisfied. The Buddha reiterates this with respect to the craving of hunger. Therefore, quenching, or nirvana, is also the ultimate satisfaction of desire. The Buddha never renounces the principle of wholesome pleasure, and emancipation itself is seen as blissful. In order to realize this in practice, one must be very advanced towards the realization of emptiness and thus emancipation, for anyone else would not be able to overcome attachment and thus intensify even more their bondage to rebirth. Therefore, by definition, only the very advanced yogi can practice psychosomatic yoga, or a bodhisattva in his final rebirth. At the same time, there are also degrees of practice. Householder forms of psychosomatic yoga logically follow. By following these, the householder may be assured of complying with the third precept. In conclusion, I'd like to read an explicit description of Tibetan psychosomatic yoga, also called the Secret and Wisdom Empowerments, found on page 233 of chapter 7 of Paul Williams's Buddhist Thought by Anthony Tribe, which perfectly summarizes all of the foregoing. Quote, the secret and wisdom empowerments were controversial in India for the sexual elements in them. They may still seem shocking today. The secret empowerment, which follows the completion of the jar empowerments, requires the person being initiated, who in the texts is generally presumed to be male, to lead the woman who will be his tantric partner to the Vajra master. The Vajra master sexually unites with her. After ejaculating, the Vajra master collects some of the combined sexual fluids, which is symbolically equated with bodhicitta, from the woman's vagina. This he places on the tongue of the person being initiated, who must swallow it without hesitation, exclaiming, O bliss! Chanda Maha Rosana Tantra 3. For the wisdom empowerment, the Vajra master returns the woman to the person being initiated, who in turn unites with her. As he does so, he, in theory, should experience a series of 4 states of bliss, or ananda. The 9 yanas of Nyingma. The ancient school, Nyingma, divided the entire Buddhist path into 3 vehicles and 9 stages. The vehicles are called vehicles because they are means of going. Compare the chariot, Hebrew Merkabah, as a symbol of the great work in Kabbalah. The stages are called stages because they are stages of the way. Anthony Tribe, interestingly, observed that, quote, this division is broadly chronological. Kriya Tantras are generally earlier than the Charya, with the Charya generally preceding the Yoga Tantras, quote unquote. All of these divisions are ultimately divisions of 2 things, the path and the fruit, which are in turn the kinetic and static aspects of the one ultimate transdual reality, the Dharma itself. Each stage is characterized by view, meditation, and activity. In the table that follows, I have focused on clarifying the practice or practices associated with each stage expressed in the simplest and most direct language possible. Many of these practices are cultural adaptations of universal techniques found all through the perennial philosophy, but are presented in deliberately involved, obscure, and often ambiguous language, the so called twilight language, so are difficult to identify clearly, which is why I have chosen to focus on them here. The table collates multiple references, not all of which agree. As you can see, and you can take a look at this table on my website, www.palisutas.com. That's PALISUTTAS.com. You can use the search bar to search for the title of this talk, and you can find it. The psychosomatic yoga is specifically associated with the 8th degree of Anuyoga. Anuyoga corresponds to the tantric completion phase already mentioned in this grade. One visualizes the mental body, chakras, winds, energy channels, and the bindu, identified with the vital or essential consciousness or vijnana. One meditates on and experiences the identity of nirvana and samsara as the unity of emptiness and wisdom. The Anuyoga Tantras number 3,000 pages in Tibetan text. A quick search in Amazon shows that there is one book on Anuyoga in English, Key to Opening the Wisdom Door of Anuyoga by Kenshen Palden Sherab Rinpoche. And I will summarize the table here, although, as I said, you can find it also on the website. 9 yanas of the Nyingma system. Inner internal tantra, the way of transformation. 9th degree. Hatha yoga ayana mahamudra dzogchen. 8th degree. Anu yoga yana Anuttara yoga, completion or perfection stage. Psychosomatic yoga, meditation on the mental body. Chakras, winds, energy channels, and essential consciousness. Some sources place the 6 yogas of Naropa here. 7th degree. Mahayogayana, generation or development stage, psychosomatic elements, and forbidden or impure substances, working with the yidang, subtle body, and 6 yogas of Naropa. Other sources say identification with the divine being and their consort or Shakti. Outer, external Tantra, the way of purification. Sixth degree, Yoga Tantra or Yogayana, minor psychosomatic elements. Some sources say identification with a divine being. Fifth degree, Charya Tantra or Upatantrayana or Abhaya, self identification with a divine being or deity yoga. Some sources say regarding the divine being as a brother or friend. Fourth degree, Kriya Tantra or Kriyayana, rituals of protection, purification, mantras and mandalas, and deity worship. Sutra, the way of renunciation. Third degree, Bodhisattva, cultivation of the perfections. Bodhicitta, realization of emptiness, 37 factors of enlightenment. Second degree, Pratyeka Buddha, tranquility and insight meditation, method of reversal or interconnectedness. Or I should say, pardon me. Tranquility and insight meditation, method of reversal, interconnectedness. First degree, Shravaka, self control, ethics. Some sources put insight and tranquility meditation here. And at the as the basis of the entire system, Yandro. Okay, so that does complete my talk for this Sunday. Thank you very much for your attention. As always, it is my pleasure and privilege to present Dharma. I will conclude with a dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. And you'll have to excuse me while I just find that. According to the Buddha, based on the law of cause and effect, everything one thinks, says, and does has a result. Every result is in turn a cause of further results in an infinitely interconnected network of cause and effect. The Dharma itself is especially efficacious. It creates beneficial results wherever it spreads. This effectiveness is the power of truth. A common term for this effect is merit. Most of the merit of teaching or even talking about Dharma returns not only to the speaker, but also to the listeners. The dedication of merit establishes the intention to sacrifice the merit one receives in favor of others. The dedication of merit is an act of generosity. Generosity itself is karmically efficacious and thus it generates more merit. By redirecting the merit that one receives to others, the dedication of merit acts like an amplifier, redirecting ever greater merit to others. Thus, what becomes an agent of ever increasing merit. The dedication of merit causes the merit of the Dharma to spread exponentially through the whole system. Please feel free to join me in this. By the merit of this talk, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings. Namaskar. Thank you, as always, for this opportunity to present Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. This talk repeats the live talk that I present Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and always be repeated on the next day, Sunday, at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Uh, so I will next week we will continue with the next talk in the series of 108 Dharma talks, which we will be presenting over the next 14 months. Namaskar.